All right, welcome to this week's Outreach Leadership Call. As a usual reminder, copies of this recording will be posted on the Monroe website. So if you don't want to be recorded, either turn off your video, sign under an anonymous profile, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're here, you're consenting to be recorded, maybe is what I should say. So for this week, we are excited and delighted to be featuring our interview with Candice Sanderson. Candy, for those of you who don't know her, which I'd be shocked if you didn't, but internet viewers or people who are watching this recording may not know who she is. Candy is one of our luminaries in Monroe. She helped to found the local chapter network. I don't know how many years ago we'd say that is now, what, 12 years? 10 years, something like that. So Candy helped us found this network. And my big joke I like to say is the amazing thing is whenever someone leaves a leadership position in most organizations, they go into witness protection because they are never to be seen or heard from again, as though they had never existed on the planet. And yet here at Monroe, we have this amazing thing where people, when they retire from something like Leadership Council, continue to stay involved all these years later. So it's such a wonderful honor to have Candy with us. And so with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and just get started with the interview because I know Candy is well prepared. And so we really want to hear what you have to say and give some chance so we can open the floor to everybody else. So with that being said, let me start. Tell us a little bit about you, Candy, like where you grew up, what was your work and your spiritual life prior to Monroe?
Okay, thanks, Mark. I grew up in Paducah, Kentucky. Paducah is in the western part of the state, not too far from where the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers converge. This area of the country is known as the Bible Belt, and Paducah is right in the middle of it. Religion was a very significant part of my upbringing, but spirituality, not so much. That was one of those new age ideas that, frankly, I didn't give much thought to. Although raised as a Southern Baptist, my training as a psychologist led me to a new religion, science. You see, this training had taught me what to trust, the world of the physical. I defined everything in a materialistic way. If I couldn't measure something with my senses, it didn't exist, not in my world. Anything that existed outside of the world of physicality was based on wishful thinking, or as my training as a psychologist had taught me to believe, pathology. But there was this secret side to me that no one knew about. There were things that my science could not explain. I couldn't mark it up to pathology because I knew better. Now, who led me to this mysterious side? My mother. She was intuitive. She had what we called in those days ESP, extrasensory perception. If she said she had a feeling about something, I learned to respect that, usually the hard way. Let me give you an example. At about age 9 or 10, my mother asked me to take the trash out to the garbage can, which is outside. She said, "Wear shoes. I have a feeling that you'll slice your foot open." Well, I took the trash out, but it was too much trouble to put on shoes. You can guess the rest of the story. I stepped on a large piece of glass that literally splayed my foot open. That was one of my first painful reminders that taught me to listen to my mother. She knew things that others did not. And although I could not explain it, I learned to respect her intuitive nature. At age 23, my sister Jana died in a car accident. A short time later, Jana came to my mother in a dream to say Mr. Gregory was with her. Now, Mr. Gregory was a man who had been the CEO of a business college my sister had attended. I didn't get this. I didn't understand the significance of this dream until I saw the evening paper. I opened it up, and that's where I read Mr. Gregory's obituary that detailed his sudden passing. Now, I could not wrap my head around this. My mother had told me about her dream hours before the paper arrived. And this was way back in 1970, long before the internet. There was no way that my mother would known about his passing. But this became a pivotal point in my life. I could no longer think of dreams as fantasy or as a chemical release. And although this occurred decades ago, its impact remains with me even today. This dream brought me two life-altering lessons. One, when my sister welcomed Mr. Gregory to the other side, I'd learned that we are not alone when we cross into that dimension that we call death. And number two, when Jana told my mother of Mr. Gregory's arrival, I learned there is communication after death. I didn't know how to reconcile this with my life of science. I continued living in a world defined by materialism, trusting only what I could measure, but something had changed. The doors to the non-physical had cracked just enough to allow me to glimpse into a new truth. I became curious, wondering about a dimension where my physical senses did not operate the way I thought they should operate. I finished my training and I became certified as both a clinical psychologist and a year later, a school psychologist. I worked in Kentucky for what feels like a billion years until I moved to Naples, Florida in the early 90s. And at this point, my life, my career was steeped in the foundations of science. I'd lived a very empirical, pragmatic life, at least on the surface. But those experiences with my mother piqued my interest. I couldn't explain them. They didn't fit within that paradigm of life that I had. So I just kept them neatly tucked aside until I was ready to see more. And Mark, that's when I met my Monroe family.
That leads me to what and who brought you to Monroe and how long have you been here?
I think it was early 2009 when I met Paul Rademacher. He was the executive director of Monroe Institute. He was traveling across the country to introduce this new concept. It was a grassroots initiative to share the expansion of consciousness across the globe. And this movement was later headed by what became known as the LCN, the Local Chapter Network. I met with Paul when his travels brought him to South Florida. But at the time, I hadn't even gone to Monroe, but I was registered for Gateway Voyage. Gateway is, I don't know, Monroe's initial program. It lays the foundation for many other classes. I hadn't attended yet, but I was so excited to meet Paul. And along with several other friends from Naples, we were so excited about his initiative that we immediately started a chapter. Naples became the LCN's first official local chapter. Now, since that time, I've attended close to 20 programs. Monroe has been my home away from home. It's my place of refuge. Some people visit ashrams as part of their spiritual practice. Me, I hop on a plane and I fly to Monroe. It's my spiritual practice. I can't get enough. And my love for Monroe Institute continues to this day. It will always hold a very special place in my heart. So Mark, it was Paul Rademacher who jump-started my passion with Monroe Institute.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Candy. So can you tell us a little bit about what accomplishments are you most proud of with Monroe and then outside of Monroe?
Sure, that's easy enough to answer. My work on the Leadership Council of the LCN, It was so exciting to help manifest Paul Rademacher's dream to advance the exploration of consciousness. We built the framework for others to connect as we are today across the globe. We did that by implementing his grassroots initiative. I've always believed that important changes begin at home, and this was no exception. The second part of the question, my accomplishments outside of Monroe, Mark, they are because of Monroe. Monroe Institute, its people, its programs have changed me. They've changed my life. When I first registered for Gateway Voyage, I was a novice. I was fascinated by my mother's intuitive nature. And because of her, I had an inkling about these sometimes mystical experiences, these realms that existed outside of what my senses could measure. I was interested and curious to learn more. But as far as psychic abilities, I had zero skills. I wanted to learn more. And if possible, I wanted to know how to tap into these mysterious focus levels that I had read about in Bob Monroe's books and online. I like being prepared, as many of you all know. So I had bought the entire HemiSync Wave series. Now, these CDs were touted as a sort of home study kit or a guide for Gateway Voyage. By listening to them, I knew I would experience some of Monroe's sound-based technology. We all know people who claim that they can't meditate. Thoughts run through their brains like hamsters on a wheel, just spinning and spinning and spinning and going nowhere. But that's the beauty of Monroe sound science. The frequencies do the work. They carry you to different states of awareness, to different focus levels. I still laugh today and say it's the lazy person's way to meditate. All you have to do is put on the headphones and you let the sounds do the rest. So I thought, perfect. I bought my Wave series. I used them every day for more than 6 months before I ever stepped on Monroe Institute's main campus in Virginia. Let me tell you about the first CD when I listened to it. I found myself having my first conscious out of body or OBE experience. I'm lying in my bed with my headphones on, but within seconds, I was sitting on someone else's couch. I didn't know where, I didn't recognize it, and I certainly didn't know how. It just happened. Beginner's luck? I mean, who knows? But it was a promising start, a start to something that has not yet finished. So, already registered for Gateway. I decided to drive a couple hours north of where I live in South Florida to attend a weekend excursion workshop. Excursion workshops are designed to offer a sampling of some of the sound-based exercises you would experience on campus. The leader, Dr. Francine King. Now, many of us know Francine. She's the trainer that's been at Monroe longer than anyone else, since 1986. So the training wheels were off. I had the Wave series, the excursion with Francine. I'm running my own local chapter, all before stepping on campus. A few months later, that day finally arrived, Gateway Voyage. Little did I know that this would be such an important step in my life. Now that I'm getting ready to share some of the experiences at Monroe, let me give the official Monroe disclaimer. These are my opinions and not representative of the Monroe Institute. That being said, I'll share my disclaimer. In my opinion, I've heard others, many others, who have had similar experiences. Now that those disclaimers are out of the way, let's get back to Gateway. It was great. To prepare for this talk, I got in my closet and I found my Gateway journal and I read through it. And I realized as I looked at that, I didn't have an OBE. And in real time, I really couldn't pinpoint any specific event that changed me, but did I ever feel it afterward? You know, I loved the other participants at Gateway. There was camaraderie, and I discovered they were just like me. You could share a really weird dream, and they would understand. It was finding your tribe. But as far as feeling the change, I didn't notice what changed me initially. It was gradual, but with each program, beginning with Gateway, I definitely changed. Each program took me farther beyond the confines of my comfortable life, my life that I had defined by my physical senses. Now, many of you have attended programs, and I'm sure you can relate. As you go deeper into each program, your awareness expands. Near the end of the week, the classes start to wind down, and the trainers ground us. They prepare us to return to the real world. And I always hated that. It's like, no, no, I don't want to go back. But when I look at what was happening over time, I could see it. Each program bumped up my baseline and changed me a little. It wasn't all at once, but it was in very steady increments. I became less materialistic, perhaps more spiritual. It's difficult to put labels on something that is so transformative. Your entire belief system shifts. What you had known your whole life to be true, well, it simply wasn't. I had lived so comfortably in my empirical world of the physical, and then Monroe's programs shined a light on new knowledge. I realized how incomplete my view of the world was. I learned we truly are more than our physical bodies. And for those of you who are not familiar with Monroe, many exercises begin with an affirmation. That affirmation starts off with, I am more than my physical body. Over time, I've come to appreciate how profound that one statement is. It's the basis of my experiences, all of my experiences at Monroe. My spiritual growth increased with each program. But in real time, I didn't see it. I felt myself changing, but little did I know, I was headed gradually toward an abyss, toward a void so deep and wide that it would swallow me completely. That tipping point came in late July 2013 when I attended a Monroe program called Lifeline. Lifeline, where the frequencies take you to a place where you can assist newcomers, those are souls who have recently passed. We can assist them to the other side. We were there to help them complete their final journey, to deliver them to what Monroe referred to as the park or Focus 27. It's what we called in my childhood heaven. I cannot think of a more selfless service than to help someone with their final transition. But that's not why I went to the program. I did it because Lifeline was a prerequisite for another program. But you know, that might be key to what happened. I did not enter the program with expectations. Honestly, I didn't even have any desire for retrieval work. What was retrieval anyway? Were we retrieving parts of ourselves? I mean, were we really retrieving souls of people, like real people who had passed away? I'll never forget the first exercise. I'm in my check unit, CHEC. That's an acronym. Bob Monroe loved his acronyms. That's an acronym for controlled, holistic environmental chamber, check units. They're like sleeping berths on a train. They're usually single-size mattresses. They're on platforms that are tucked inside a wall. And when you close the heavy curtains, it's completely dark. Now, there's lights too if you want them, but I prefer the darkness. In that first exercise, I'm resting comfortably in my check unit. And the voice over my headphones tells me to find someone who needs help with their transition. But nothing happened. That didn't surprise me. You see, back then, although I had attended several programs at Monroe and I was growing to love this consciousness exploration, I wasn't very good at it. Other people were, but not me. But for reasons I can't explain, I reached outside of my unit and fumbled for my phone. I brought it in, opened it up, found my recording app, and I hit record. Out of the blue, I spoke a man's first and last names, followed by a city and state, a place I'd never been. I've never even been in that state before. Next came the word Jackson. I didn't know what that name was, but for whatever reason, I knew it was not a family name. I had no idea what was going on, but I just went with it. In my mind, I'm thinking, isn't it funny how your mind just makes things up? How your mind just invents things. When the exercise ended, we were called together to debrief our findings. My phone was already in my hand. So, along with my roommate, Lauren Belge, we Googled the man's name. And as an afterthought, I typed in the word obituary in the search bar. Oh my gosh, within seconds, there was his death notice. I could not believe it. Not only his first and last names, but his location, city, and state. And a detail that I did not discover until years later when I was researching him to include this story in my first book. He had passed exactly 3 months before to the day of the retrieval. For some reason, learning that this was the 3rd month anniversary of his death and learning it years later, it added an element of realness that gave me cold chills. Then I saw the name Jackson, and I was right. It was not a family name. It was his place of business. It didn't stop there. There was something else in the death notice, online death notice, that jumped out at me. And this was new information. And it was more important than any information that I had received. He was a psychologist. And suddenly it made perfect sense. That new information was the glue. It solidified all the other pieces of the puzzle. It brought the full picture into view. We both shared the energy of psychologists. That is why we connected. So on a level that I was not prepared to really understand at the time, I realized that we share the same energy frequency, and that had made our connection possible. After this exercise, I retrieved many others, and Google searches confirmed the details that absolutely shocked me with how easily the information arrived. I had first, middle, and last names of many people. Verification, confirmation, authentication. That's what psychologists love, and I was loving it. Lifeline changed me from believer to knower, but I didn't realize it at the time. The foundations of my belief system crumbled before me and shifted my current existence. What I thought I'd known about life suddenly became very murky, unclear. I realized how much I did not know. And as the underpinnings of my life shifted, I emerged from this rubble, changed, transformed. But it wasn't in real time. I didn't know it until a couple weeks later as I drove to work early one morning. And that's when it happened. All of my experience with those sound-based frequencies over the years at Monroe peaked. Yes, a couple weeks after Lifeline on an early morning commute, I began to channel messages from the non-physical, from this realm where I learned that I indeed was more than my physical body. Now, while Mark's thinking, when is she going to answer the question? I'm going to come back full circle to that original question. My accomplishments because of Monroe. Is it the two books I've published, The Reluctant Messenger and The Reluctant Messenger Returns? I mean, after all, they've won awards in international competition. They've both reached the #1 bestseller on Amazon. I've sold thousands of copies across the globe. They even contain written endorsements from Monroe Institute people like past CEOs, Paul Rademacher and Scott Taylor, trainers and staff members like William Buellman, Alan Evans, John Cordham, Fred Reibel. But to say these two books are my greatest accomplishments? No, that's not true. It's the experiences behind the books that I'm most proud of. As I reflect back to 2009 when Paul Rademacher started what became known as the LCN, I realize that initiative, Paul's initiative, still drives me today. I am honored to do my small, very small part to help in an awakening of consciousness across the globe. In Bob Monroe's words, to get it out there. So in my small way, I'd like to think that I'm helping to spread Bob Monroe's principles by sharing how Monroe Institute changed my life. I am more than my physical body. And because I know I am more than physical matter, I am able to live life fuller. I'm able to see the larger picture. That's what I'm proud of, learning to see that there's more to life than meets the eyes. Learning to take a deep dive into the mysteries behind life that Nikola Tesla talked about: energy, frequency, and vibration. That's where the secrets of the universe lie. That's where wisdom is. And it's right here at our fingertips. It's right here for the asking. We don't have to die or have a near-death experience. All we need is an open heart and to know, to truly know that we are more than our physical bodies. So thank you, Mark.
That's amazing. Thank you, Candy. I have to say that is one of the best answers and most complete answers I've ever had to that question. Thank you for taking the time to make sure that you kind of encapsulated all of that in there. Thank you. Moving on, what have been some of your greatest challenges at Monroe and how have you handled them?
That's an interesting question. You know, I like to be prepared. So I had prepared this long response to that. And then I realized, oh, I can't say that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to broaden my answer to address any challenges in life, because otherwise it seems like I'm suggesting a problem or I'm complaining about something.
Okay.
So first of all, I'm sharing what guidance tells me. Does it mean that I do these things all of the time? Just ask my family. No, I don't. But when I confront difficulties, challenges, I realize I'm too close to see clearly because I'm blinded. Is it by my ego? Is it by my personality? But when I'm faced with a situation, I'm guided, don't say I always do it, to step back, and then I take a deep breath. I move my awareness to gain a greater perspective. If there's a challenge, I ask, what is the reason for this? What can I learn from this? What is the gift? The answers, Mark, always arrive, but sometimes it takes me months or even years to recognize the answers. But it's how we respond to challenges in life that define us. It's a life lesson that presents itself to us like a gift, but it's a gift that sometimes keeps giving and giving time and time again until we get it right. And it's like, phew. But with each opportunity, we have the choice to respond from an intellectual, data-driven point of view. I did that a lot. I could point out those pros and cons. Or we can choose to respond with anger, hurling hurtful words at others. Or, because they're all choices, we can choose to respond from our hearts, always remembering to play nice. Can we pause to see everyone's perspective, not just ours? Or do we impulsively kick others out of our sandbox? That's not kind. That's not inclusive. That's not helpful. No one wins in situations like that. So I've learned to take a deep breath during challenging times because that breath allows me to stop that automatic stimulus response model that I'd lived with my entire life. By taking a focused, purposeful breath, I put a break between the stimulus and my response. Something enchanted happens in that gap between inhalation and exhalation. It is a pause, a sacred space that offers an opportunity for change. It offers an invitation to hear the whispers of wisdom from guidance. When we do this, doors open, creating room for clarity. No longer do you react to the situation at hand. Instead, mindful choices bubble into your awareness. Thoughtful decisions are easier to make. This is the way of the heart. Once you open within, your heart seeks reunion with its greater counterpart, the realm of energy, of spirit. It's that non-physical world of vibrations and frequencies of our true nature. Choosing the path of the heart guides us to peace, to wisdom. It is through the heart that we become masters, true masters of our lives. The heart leads us beyond those 5 physical senses that do help us navigate our 3D lives here on earth. But living through the heart, Mark, we realize we never were our physical bodies.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for that. What are some of the biggest surprises you've encountered while at Monroe?
Well, now I really need to reinsert that disclaimer, my opinions and not those representative of Monroe Institute. My biggest surprise was my miraculous healing that I received at Monroe in February 2013. A little bit of background, in November 2012, I had a bilateral thyroidectomy that resulted in paralysis of my right vocal cord. I could no longer speak above a whisper. Being a psychologist, I needed my voice. It was my lifeline to work. I had to wear a microphone that was connected to a voice box that amplified my whispers. But the paralysis didn't just affect my ability to talk. I had trouble breathing and swallowing. Now, let's fast forward to February 2013. 2 critical things happened that month. The first one, my surgeon sent me to a specialist because it had been 3 months since I had had my voice. He said I needed to go to a specialist. This specialist scoped my throat. Now, what's so important about this is now my medical condition, My paralyzed vocal cord is documented, complete with a video scan to prove the paralysis. I was supposed to return the next week for the pre-surgical process to begin. The second critical event happened later that same week. I flew from Naples, Florida to Charlottesville, Virginia to attend an LCN local chapter network working retreat at Monroe's home campus. As part of the LCN Leadership Council, I had a speaking role. Oh man, was that awkward. I'm standing at the podium in David Francis Hall in front of a group of about 50 people, and there are wires all over the place. Normally, I would have enough volume to speak without a mic, but no. The mics were a mess. There was one for the room. I also had my personal mic, and I had one for the online streaming. And everyone's trying to arrange these wires and not get feedback. And while they were doing that, I told the participants about my paralyzed vocal cord. Many people who attend Monroe's programs are professionals. There are a lot of medical doctors, scientists, physicists, psychologists, attorneys, and many of them are also natural healers. So while they're wiring me for sound, I announced that I welcomed any and all healing from the online plus the on-campus people. That evening, Mark, the group held a healing session just for me. It was led by Carol Sabick, who later became the executive director at Monroe, and Fred Reibel, who later became a board member and a residential trainer at Monroe. The rest of the attendees circled the room and just holding space and adding all of their healing through Carol and Fred. I was so touched. I was so appreciative of their efforts. Afterwards, I still couldn't use my voice, but I also know that healing sometimes takes a different form than what you expect. At the end of the last day of the conference, we had a treat planned for those that were on campus attending. Bob Holbrook, the mastermind behind Monroe Sound Science, had asked if our group would beta test some of the new technology he was working on. Everyone jumped at the chance to do that. So we returned to our check units to listen to 3 short selections, along with the form and pencils to record our results. Oh my gosh, I'll never forget what happened on the second selection. Buddha came to me. He said, "Be silent for 24 hours and you will be healed." I didn't know what to think. I mean, I grew up as a Southern Baptist. Buddha was not on my radar, not in my orbit at all. But that's one reason why I know I didn't make this up. If I had invented this, I would have chosen someone from my Christian heritage to give this message. But after we listened to the selections, we reconvened at David Francis Hall. I had taken my vow to remain silent. I was not about ready to break that promise. So I scribbled notes to my friend, Alan Evans, who was sitting next to me, and she read it to the rest of the group. That night, we were all sitting in the Fox Den chilling, and all of a sudden you hear this ding, ding, ding. Phones started chiming all over the room, one after the other. These were text notifications from the airlines telling us to reschedule our flights home. A snowstorm was blowing through the area, and all early morning flights were canceled. So, delayed by 7 or 8 hours, I finally flew out the next afternoon. Fred Reibel was with me on that first leg of my flight from Charlottesville, Virginia to Charlotte, North Carolina. And when we disembarked, it was into chaos. The airport was packed with people because of the cancellations and now overbooked flights. It was frenzied. My connecting gate was in the opposite direction of Fred's, yet he accompanied me to my gate to make sure I was guaranteed a seat. He knew if they canceled this flight, I would not use my voice to make other arrangements. I made it home, and that evening when that 24-hour window had passed, I tried out my voice. After 3 months of whispers, My voice had returned. It was back, full volume. Now, was it the sound-based technology that we were testing at the retreat? Was it the healing group from 2 days before? Was it Buddha? Was it all of the above? All I know is that this was a medical miracle, a documented medical miracle, and it occurred at Monroe. So Mark, this was my biggest surprise that I've encountered while at Monroe, but let me end with something that I discovered a few days ago. Reading through my 2009 Gateway Journal last week, I realized I had seen Buddha during an exercise at Gateway. He was sitting in that lotus position that I'm sure you've seen before. He didn't say anything, just floated in and floated out. At the time, that didn't have any significance for me. And during the LCN retreat 4 years later in 2013, I didn't remember that Buddha had made that brief appearance during Gateway. I only discovered that this week in August of 2021. That's 12 years after Buddha's first visit. When I realized I'd seen him twice, at both times at Monroe, cold chills just racked my body from head to toe. It suggests that Buddha holds much more significance than I had known, both to me and to my healing. You know, I mentioned something earlier before we started recording. Donna Rebido is on this Zoom call with us, and she knows this so well. Donna hosts a YouTube channel with me called The Reluctant Messenger Unleashed. It's a virtual book club where we go through The Reluctant Messenger, chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page, to unleash the stories behind the book. And Donna knows that time and time again, we've seen this happen. We're in the middle of recording, or I'm rereading a chapter to prepare for an episode, and the messengers step in to provide new information, new insight. Guidance offers us another interesting piece of information to make the initial experience even more significant. It speaks to the timeless nature of guidance. So Mark, it's these spontaneous aha moments that continue to spark my interest time and time again.
Wow. Well, Candy, I'm just going to ask one more question before I open things up to the floor. And we are going to extend a little bit beyond our regular time, but I promise we won't go very far. So my last question for you before we open up the floor is, tell us more about your experience as a channeler, and what advice do you have for people interested in channeling themselves?
Okay. That medical miracle, the return of my voice, was a precursor to my channeling. And with that checked off the list, I realized later why I had lost my voice and why I was healed. I was being groomed to be a voice for the non-physical. And if you want to know more about it, you can read my second book, The Reluctant Messenger Returns. However, before I could use my new voice for channeling, I needed experience. I needed practice. Enter Lifeline. So 5 months later, after my healing, I went to Lifeline, and it provided me the training wheels to go solo. And a few weeks after returning home from Lifeline, I began channeling messages from this beautiful non-physical realm of energy, realms that some refer to as spirit. In August 2013, I'm on my way to work early one morning before sunrise. I'm driving on automatic pilot, not paying attention to the road. Instead, I'm running through the day's schedule of back-to-back meetings when out of the blue, a message drops into my awareness. And I immediately knew this was not from me. It was a message for me. And briefly, it was a message about a flower, saying that when you look at a flower, it's at its peak when it's open, and that a flower is a flower, so hyphenating that word flower. The message said a plant draws energy deep within Mother Earth, and then it ascends toward Father Sky. And when it's in perfect alignment with Source, it produces a flower. The message said it's the same for humans, that when we allow our energy to flow, we open to growth and potential. The message ended with, let's all be flowers, flowers of energy. I didn't know what to think of this. The phrasing, the vocabulary, not mine. I didn't use terms like that back then. What was this? Now you've got to realize who I was back then, a grounded, down to earth psychologist living in the empirical world of measurement. All of my training as a psychologist had taught me what to look at, what's wrong. So I did. My first thought, what's wrong with me? Have I become psychotic? Yet as my heart pounded in my chest, in my head, I'm running through the criteria for psychosis listed in the DSM-5, which is the manual of disorders we use to diagnose conditions. Then I took a deep breath. It's like, no, I'm oriented to time, place, and person. Yet I couldn't explain what happened. So I did what many of us do. I dismissed it. I didn't think about it. This is not uncommon. When we're confronted with a novel situation, something that's never happened, we don't have any information to work with. We have no data files stored in our brains to tell us how to process this new information. Operating with no experience to guide us, we're fumbling in the dark. So it's easier to bring in denial. That defense mechanism that helps us resist what we don't know or don't want to see or deal with. And that's what I did. I dismissed it. I had more important things to do, like getting to work an hour early. So a few minutes later, I pull into the empty parking lot, gather my stuff, head toward the building, but something stopped me. I was distracted, dead in my tracks. I turned to see what it was that stopped me. I was face to face with a tree, a royal poinciana tree. Now, I had passed this tree hundreds of times before, but something was different. The tree called to me. It beckoned me. So I walked to this subtropical tree that is covered in these vivid red-orange blossoms that look like orchids. Its leaves are delicate, almost look like ferns. From its gnarly trunk, there were these wide spreading branches that curved upward, and it formed this stunning canopy. It looked like something out of National Geographic, like a lone tree in the middle of the Serengeti. It was magnificent. The sun was starting to rise, and beams of light filtered through the leaves. It created these mesmerizing patterns of shadow and light on the ground. And I stood there in awe. Here I was, alone with the tree, but I realized I wasn't alone. This was not just a living tree, but a sentient being as much alive as I was. I stood there. Time seemed to stop as I just soaked in the tree's beauty. I was suspended in a space where time did not exist. Yet, while frozen in this realm where I could not measure time, I felt more alive than I ever had in my life. Suddenly, my focus shifted to a tiny bud that had not yet flowered. And my thoughts returned to some of the last words I just heard on that morning commute. Let us all be flowers of energy. Any doubts I had had about the message dissipated. And on some very deep yet undiscovered level, I knew I had been guided to this tree to see that unopened bud. The bud represented me. It's us. It represents us. We are the flowers of energy, just waiting to bloom. After a few moments, I went inside the building, not knowing what had happened, not knowing how the message and the experience with the tree would change me, not knowing I had taken my first steps into the unseen world of spirit. I would never be the same. But although I didn't realize it in real time, the message And the mystical experience with the Royal Poinciana tree was the beginning of a new life for me. Now I had the ability to step into the world of spirit. My training kicked in as a professional. I rushed to my office, documented everything that happened. I had to preserve these events, to capture every word, every thought, every feeling. And what I could not and did not know at the time was these were my first steps leading me away from my normal life. I began to realize there were aspects of life that I knew nothing about. I had not experienced them until this day. And it was so new to me. I didn't know what was going on. Here I was ready to dismiss this message about a flower until the mystical experience with the tree. I couldn't ignore what happened after that. Soon, the floodgates opened. My first contact was from people who had passed away. They had messages they wanted me to share with their loved ones here on earth. This was followed by all sorts of messengers, star beings, religious icons from Buddhism, Christianity, and Native American culture. I connected with angels, guides, and ascended masters. Then came lessons on time and how it works, a crystalline grid that covers the earth, information about vibrations and frequencies, tips on how to live life more fully. I learned about a ladder of enlightenment and how I could use that as a tool to rapidly expand my consciousness. The messengers explained the life review process, giving me insight from a very different perspective. I even got a glimpse of creation. Imagine that. Through these communications, I began to view the world differently. Slipping away was my materialism, and I began to see the world through the lens of energy. It didn't take long to establish a routine. I'd get in my car every morning, buckle up, crank on the engine, and hit record on my iPhone. And the words from the messengers would flow. And that's exactly what they were, very specific words. Now, of course, I didn't hear them with my physical ears, but they were precise. The messengers told me what to say. It was just like dictation. If I made a mistake, they would say, strike that, followed by the correct word. They told me what punctuation to use, when to start a new paragraph, even how to spell and pronounce unfamiliar words. I would record those messages during my morning commute. Every night I would come home and I would transcribe them. And soon I had over 100 pages. But let me circle back, Mark, to the question, what advice do I have for people interested in channeling? Although it appeared that my channeling was spontaneous, it wasn't. In retrospect, it was related to all of my experiences at Monroe. Learning that I was more than my physical body set the framework for my channeling. The healing of my paralyzed vocal cord was another step in that grooming process. The next step was to fine tune that new apparatus that took place at Lifeline. And because I didn't care what happened at Lifeline, my judgment, my ego didn't interfere with my experience. I just went with the flow. I was a flower of energy. My remarkable experiences at Lifeline did not make me a believer in retrievals. No, I came home knowing this was real. This was a tipping point for me. I had stepped off the ledge and into an abyss. I floated in a sea of knowing that my life had changed. Lifeline set off a chain reaction, a domino effect that cascaded through my entire belief system. And as each belief was released, it made room for another truth, and I was transformed. The key factors that have worked for me with channeling is to, like I did in Lifeline, let go of expectations. Take a let's see what happens attitude. Go with the flow, be that flower. Remain objective. Don't judge. Have fun. Play with it. Often when information comes in, it sounds familiar, it might be your words, your phraseologies. So it's easy to understand that some people will doubt and say, oh, I must be making this up. But don't judge. That stops the flow. Be that objective observer. Afterwards, you can research the information. And last, but probably one of the most important factors, give thanks for the information you receive. That is key. Gratitude. It keeps that energy flowing.
Candy, that's amazing. Thank you. I'm in awe. As I said, I'm gonna drop my last two questions because I want to leave room for people in the room to ask some questions. I did ask for anybody to raise their hand using the raise hand feature, but I know we're not a crowd that tends to do that. It's like trying to corral the cats. So if you're on camera, raise your hand, and if otherwise, speak up. But who has some questions for Candy? Go ahead, Donna.
Well, I was going to be quiet, but I don't like silence, I guess, when we're on a Zoom call. So Candy, going from Southern Baptist to where you are now, that's quite a leap. Have you ever looked back and wondered, or kind of looked at how far you've come and amazed? Was that an amazement?
Donna, I do not resemble that person I was growing up. I may have the same features and I may have the same wicked sense of humor, but as far as life, I am just so different. I mean, being a Southern Baptist, that was important to us. You know, every time the church doors were open, we would be there. And what I feel like now is, for me, religion is just one of those paths up the mountain. My view of heaven, of Focus 27, of source, of whatever word you want to use, is that there is a wider path that includes so much more than what my religious training had taught me to believe. And using where I am now, I just feel like I have found a truth for me that works for me. It may not be someone else's truth. They may find it differently, but I'm just very different than what I was before. And I love it.
That was great, Candy. Thank you. Brian Daly. You're on mute, my friend.
Hey, Brian.
Really appreciate this talk. It resonates with so many of us, and it's just reinforcing Monroe is a very special place because a lot of us have had openings and such, like yourself, maybe in different ways. But do you find you have a few particular people that provide guidance on a regular basis, or is it just different for every situation?
Well, first of all, let me say something. Brian, you're wonderful. And I have some people on this call today who have never been on before. They're family members. Brian is a medical doctor, an emergency room physician. And he also is one of those healers that I talked about, where he uses energy healing and crystals because he sees the larger picture. And you're one of those people from Monroe that, you know, we get it. We realize life is, that we've taken our blinders off and we realize there's a larger, more inclusive path to healing, and we can be part of that. Now, to answer your question, if you're referring to my channeling, it's, you know, I haven't read that many books of people who have channeled, and I've only read them since I started channeling, but most of them seem to have a group of people or one person that they work with. Brian, mine are so different. I have so many messengers that come in and out depending on what the situation is. So I have learned to just be open. And when I receive the messages, I just go with it. What's been so interesting is honestly, when I first started getting this message, there was a part of me that was a little scared, like, what in the heck is this? What's going on? And because I was a little concerned, I didn't do anything, which was perfect because it allowed the energy to flow. And now I realize when I receive information from the non-physical realms, first of all, I'm always protecting myself and I have my energy vibrations up, high. I'm filled with love. I'm filled with gratitude. And the messages that come in resonate with me. If they didn't, I wouldn't, I wouldn't deal with them, but I haven't had that to occur. But they come to me in a time that I needed, or just like finding that journal and finding out that Buddha had truly been with me before. I am being given like this plate of things that I might need today, I might need tomorrow, I might need next week. And it just unfolds in such a beautiful, natural way.
That's absolutely beautiful. Have you ever had grounding issues?
Oh, most of the time, it's always earth to candy. And I think, like I'm barefoot right now, and some part of that is my Kentucky, upbringing. But I do, even in the programs, I don't want to be grounded. I want to stay and float in these beautiful vibrations, but I know I can't because I need to be grounded. And being grounded is, I think of what they said about that plant, you are grounded and then you can reach up to source and you'll be in perfect alignment. Without the grounding, even though it feels good to not be grounded, I'm not going to be functioning the way that I need to. So yes, I have had some grounding issues because once I'm in there, in those beautiful frequencies, they may last for 90 seconds. They may last for 2 minutes. I might find myself attached to a comet zooming throughout the universe, throughout the cosmos. And it's like, Candy, you need to get back because you're not going to be zooming there all day long. But when I come back and when I'm grounded, I realize I bring part of those frequencies back with me. They change me, they change my makeup. So once I am back and am grounded, I'm still changed. It's like Monroe, when each program bumps up your baseline, every moment that I spend in these beautiful vibrations changes my energy. But in order to really capitalize on it and for it to help me, I need to stay grounded.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Candy. I think we are getting close to the end of our time. So I am going to be naughty and ask my one last question for the record. And that is, when you eventually shake free of your mortal coil, what's the first thing you plan to do, assuming you have the free will to do it?
Well, I will have the free will to do it, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just hang out in Focus 27. I'm going to hang out in the park, do nothing. I'm going to just reconnect with friends and family who've gone on there before me. And then I'm going to start coming back and visiting people here on Earth, especially my grandkids. I'm going to just drop into their dreams, and that will be so much fun.
Oh, Candy, that's been, what a wonderful, thank you. Well, I want to thank you so much, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so we can get gushy.